Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. Welcome to part 2 of our Year End Retrospective of the most significant events and trends in the Jewish world in 2018. Again, I am honored to be surrounded by a wonderful panel of committed Jews who have a profound grasp of Jewish life and whose perspectives I always love hearing and sharing with you. Please let me reintroduce them to you. Thane Rosenbaum is an award-winning novelist and essayist. His works include Secondhand Smoke, Elijah Invisible, Golems of Gotham, and his most recent novel, How Sweet It Is. Thane is also a distinguished fellow at NYU Law School, and he is the director of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society, which hosts outstanding evenings where Thane speaks with major personalities from the world of politics, culture, and entertainment. And Thane Rosenbaum is also legal analyst for CBS Radio, where you can hear him virtually every day. Eric Yoffie is a Reform rabbi who for more than 25 years led the Reform movement as president of the Union for Reform Judaism, a position he now holds emeritus. Eric is now a leading columnist in the Jewish community, whose opinion pieces appear in many Jewish and secular publications and online. And Eric is a frequent scholar in residence in Jewish communities across America. Eric can also be read on his own website at ericyoffie.com. Betty Ehrenberg is one of the most respected Jewish professionals on the world Jewish scene. Betty is currently executive director for the World Jewish Congress of North America, having previously served as executive director of international affairs and communal relations for the Institute for Public Affairs, the political arm of the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America. And Charles Small is the founding director of ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. ISGAP is recognized as world Jewry's leading voice fighting anti-Israel forces in the halls of academia, and its annual 12-day conference at Oxford brings the most brilliant and diverse minds together to explore the causes and effects of anti-Semitism today. And thank you all for joining me once again. It is wonderful to be sitting with all of you. So on part 1, we began by asking what each of you thought was the most significant event. And it was really a split between Pittsburgh and moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Moving on from there, I want to begin part 2 by asking each of you, what do you think at the moment the biggest threat to Jewish life is as you look at the sweep of where the Jewish community is, both in America and in Israel? Thane, again, I want to begin with you. What's the biggest threat facing us?
Well, in some degree, it's somewhat related to what I said before, but in some ways it's different, which is that there is a profound split nowadays between liberal Jews and Jews that are, we could say, for lack of a better word, showing much more of a devoted commitment to Israel. A distinction. I reviewed a book for the Washington Post not long ago that made this argument that, especially among younger people, that there is a sharp divide between the organized Jewish community and younger Jews on campus. And that, I think, has been noted. But you're seeing it even more broadly. You could derisively call it the Tikkun Olam crowd, people for whom Judaism is expressed through social activism, and their understanding of social activism, the healing the world, means criticism of Israel, to their mind, legitimate criticism of Israel, and not their Judaism not expressed through, synagogue memberships or more conventional rituals. But I am seeing this, that there is, and unfortunately I think, the Donald Trump era has only heightened it, because the supporters of Israel are many of whom are so grateful to him, that they are defensive in that way. And apparently I'm told, anecdotally, that Shabbat dinners nowadays is always a risky affair. Inviting people to Shabbat dinners, any discussion about Israel, any discussion about Donald Trump and Israel, any discussion about the two-state solution and sort of Bibi Netanyahu, does not result in the kind of spirit of Shabbat.
Okay, and what's the threat implicit there?
Well, for decades, the social cohesion of our community was our strength. Small in numbers, but a sense of shared universal values and a sense of community involvement and commitment to one another. And now we're seeing a breakdown of that. And we're seeing that, look, in the broader polarized political scene. But, Jews are always a minority of the population. So if they're at each other for political reasons that are related to Israel, this is very distressing. Also, remember, for decades, Jewish support for Israel was not just unflagging, it was without any, division at all, right? I mean, everyone was just...
I'm not sure that's true.
Well, see, that's an interesting question that there may have always been. My feeling about it is that there was a much more, a greater consensus of universal support. Now, I will say, when I reviewed this book for the Washington Post, one of the things I noted is that when the Pew survey came out, it did show that despite all the divisiveness, when it came to the big ticket item, like who do you blame between Israel and the Palestinian for there not being peace in the conflict, over 80% of Jewish Americans blamed Palestinians. When you ask the question, in the last Gaza war, do you think Israel overreacted disproportionately and caused disproportionate loss of the Palestinian community? Again, nearly 80% said no, they did not. So maybe even with the divisiveness, there's not as much as I'm imagining.
Very interesting.
What does it mean to be left in this country? What does it mean to be liberal and left? Because I grew up thinking to be left means promoting democratic principles, empowering citizenship, empowering
How about
equality
free speech?
law, free speech, but not hate speech, where I grew up. Having access to health care and education, supporting workers' rights. These were the agenda of the left. And how can that agenda be hijacked to such a point where it's demonizing Jews and Jewish people as part of the package, and getting into bed with, as Corbyn has done and many leaders on the left, with Islamists who are diametrically opposed to not only democracy, but what it really means to be liberal. It's astounding. This hypocrisy is astounding.
Liberal values are at the heart of my own conviction, and I believe at the heart of what the American Jewish community stands for and advocates. Liberals have liberal expectations when it comes to the state of Israel. We expect the state of Israel, despite what she faces on her borders, which is truly distressing and exceedingly dangerous, nonetheless to maintain liberal values and to maintain Zionism as a Jewish and democratic movement. So I hope you are not suggesting that those who criticize Israel on liberal grounds are somehow, by definition, playing into the hands of anti-Semites, which is what we very frequently hear. And I don't know if by implication that has been suggested in this discussion.
No. I think you misunderstand me. I come from a liberal background. So it pains me as a liberal, as a real, truly, a Jewish, in that order, a Jewish liberal, not in the religious sense, but in the political sense, as a social democrat. How is it possible that somebody can consider themselves to be liberal and get into bed with leaders or parties that are supporting people who are anti-democratic, who want to destroy democracy, who want to destroy citizenship, who don't want women or minorities or gay people to be equal under the law, and they call for the extermination not just of the Zionist Israeli Jewish homeland, they call for the killing of Jews.
I take a very hard line against extremists who are working to exterminate the state of Israel. A very hard line. Having said that, those of us who happen to believe that Israel has to be a Jewish and democratic state, who believe in a two-state solution, who support the parties on the left on Israel, who embrace these positions, that we can articulate those positions, making clear at the same time what we're against, and that we need to be able to do that without the fear that those on the right are going to point a finger at us and say, you're supporting the anti-Semites.
So
there are reasonable distinctions that can be made, and I think we need to remember that.
I agree with much of what the vast majority of what you said, but the idea of a two-state solution, I also believe if there's ever going to be peace, there'll need to be a two-state solution. But as you were speaking, and you're a rabbi, I was thinking of the words of Emmanuel Levinas. And Emmanuel Levinas says that we become human. We believe we become human the moment we respect, or the moment we see our face in the face of the other. We need to respect the other to be human. This is Pirkei Avot, ethics, Talmud. But when the other doesn't see us as human, when they see us as emanating from donkey piss or from apes and pigs and want to exterminate us, according to Emmanuel Levinas, the rejection of the other leads to slavery, segregation, and even annihilation. So
you're assuming a naivete.
No,
You're
I'm not
assuming
saying
that somebody who believes in justice and is
I'm not
committed to
assuming
liberal
anything.
values is going to be naive about the dangers that Israel faces every day, about the character of their enemies, about their desire to exterminate the Jewish state. I'm not naive about any of those things.
I'm not saying you're naive.
And I don't believe that peace is possible today or tomorrow or next week or next year. But having said that, ultimately Israel needs to be Jewish and democratic. And ultimately, I believe that will come only with two states. And if we eliminate that possibility now, we're creating problems for the state of Israel that I think will be tragic for the Jewish people.
Eric, Charles does not think you're naive at all. He has tremendous respect for your intentions and the motives for why you express your liberal Jewish values, as also making it incumbent upon you to have legitimate critiques against Israel. What he's saying, I think, and if he's not saying it, I'm saying it, all right? Yeah. You're still being co-opted by people who hate Jews. Your attitude, the way you speak, the fact that you feel the permission as an intellectual Jew to say, I am a Jew of liberal values, I'm a Reformed rabbi, and I think it's incumbent upon me to call attention to the crimes committed in Israel.
Did I use the word crimes?
Not the word crimes.
Did I use the word crimes?
He's saying, coming from a Canadian progressive social democratic agenda, he's saying, it seems odd, and I think my answer to Charles about this is that, and unfortunately I've lived too much of my life in universities, we're making a mistake when we invoke the word liberal, because we really should be invoking the word progressive, because what he's really talking about is the progressive intellectual community on campus. This is a whole different package. This is what Bernie Sanders is about. This is what Ocasio-Cortez is about. This is not exactly liberal Jewish values. This is really something else. That, to answer Charles, that's really the hatred of what's white, what's privileged, what's powerful, and what's colonial. And the reason I'm saying this, I consider myself a liberal Jew who respects liberal values. But I know this, that in all of the years that I was critical of Israel, and especially now, the reason I don't do it in the way that I do now is because I know it gets co-opted. It gets hijacked. It legitimizes a kind of pernicious underlying hatred of Jews that, again, creates a permission that is what I think is absolutely dangerous about Bernie Sanders. I think he's just a menace to Jews. He has been, for lovers of Israel, he has legitimized here's a Brooklyn Jew with the accent yet. He lived on a kibbutz, and yet he calls attention to, yes, the crimes of Israel.
What you're saying, though, and first of all, I'm not a Sanders supporter, and again, there are people across the liberal spectrum and across the progressive spectrum. But what you're saying is any criticism that you offer potentially is going to be co-opted, and by implication, you need to be quiet.
No. I'm just saying you're being co-opted.
And I'm saying that there are young Jews and young Zionists who are progressive and who are liberal and who are hearing the message, by the way, we want you part of this. We want you to embrace Israel. We want you to understand the majesty of the Zionist enterprise. But by the way, if you have any criticism, we expect you to shut up.
No.
Be
very careful. The people that love you actually hate you.
What I'm saying is a lot of people are hearing that message, which I think is not an unreasonable message to draw from the comments here. We need to be very careful here. There are Jews across the spectrum. There are Jews who love Israel across the spectrum and care about Israel. If Zionism means that Israel is the state of the Jewish people, and Jewish people get a say, even a critical voice. It's got to be expressed with love. It's got to be expressed carefully. It's got to be expressed in a way that you're not playing directly into the hands of people who are then going to use this to, destroy the Jewish state. I concede that. But if the ultimate message is you need to be quiet, and that's your role as a Zionist and a lover of Israel, then we're just going to drive away our young people, and they're going to conclude that they have no place in the Zionist project.
I don't think Charles or I were saying that.
And I'm suggesting that's a danger of the message.
It would be interesting for you to clarify. If you're warning Eric, be careful of the criticism you make in public, because it's going to be used by your enemy.
It does. It is.
I said, what are you suggesting he do or not do about expressing criticism?
I think Eric has an important voice in liberal reform.
Do you want him not to be critical?
No, I want him to be critical.
But you know his criticism will be used.
And that's what I'm telling you.
So you're describing, you're not giving him any advice.
No, I'm actually saying.
I have advice.
Yeah,
Give advice.
Advice is if you would like to be critical of Israel, discuss with Israelis what it is you are seeing from afar and what ideas and suggestions you have. Do it in Israel. Go to Israel, speak to the people. Don't put it in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal.
That doesn't work anymore. We live in a globalized world. Any word you express in print anywhere will be seen everywhere.
I'm sorry, that is a legitimate thing to say to you.
Including the Israeli papers and including the Israeli parties and including those on the left and the center in Israel who express their views all the time. And we read them here in New York the same day. So then to say
very often you have to explain to Israelis that what they can say to each other at home is perfectly fine with it. They can stand on a soapbox in the middle of Gan Ha'atzmaut or in the middle of the Knesset and say what they want, and that it's read differently in the diaspora. It just is. It's read differently by other governments and other peoples and other parliaments, and they have to understand that too sometimes.
My own feeling is that at the present time, are there things to criticize about Israel? Yes, but they're so relatively insignificant. In terms of the broad picture of all the concerns that confront Israel and confront world Jewry today, at the moment, they're not important enough to make an issue. And therefore, for me, the answer, how I deal with what your point is, do I want to tell Eric he can criticize? No. What I want to say to Eric is, there's no reason right now. Israel is doing nothing in terms of the Palestinians that he needs to be critical of in private or in public. And he can talk at any private meeting he has in Israel or here. He can say anything. But if he needs to write in Haaretz or in the forwards, the question is what is he trying to accomplish, and what is it that is so burning?
I mean, I obviously can answer that. I mean, within the last 3 or 4 days, a general by the name of Gadi Shamni, who was the commander of the Central Command in the IDF, recently retired, wrote an article in Yediot, and he talked about the creeping annexationism that is going to destroy Israel. This is a retired general.
So what?
A retired general. And
okay,
they're all political.
So what? There are generals who disagree with him. Let's say there is creeping annexation, which I'm not sure there is, but let's say there is. And that's happening in Israel. What do you gain by going public with a criticism, which will be used, as Thane points out, by people who do not have your perspective, but just will say, look, you know what the former head of the URJ is saying? And so what have you gained and what have you lost? To me, it's not important enough.
People who support the idea of a single state in the land of Israel that will have either an Arab majority or a 45% Arab minority are engaged in something that, in my eyes, is not Zionism.
Okay, that's okay.
That is not what Zionism is about.
But you have a right to write about that.
And I do write about that.
In an academic sense, it's not criticizing Israel. What you just said is a valid, intellectual, philosophical discussion about what Zionism is. That's not the same as criticizing Israel.
Of course it is, because the
No, it
policy
isn't.
of the state of Israel is different than
No,
that.
it is not.
So it's an argument. We'll have that argument.
Can I,
To me, that's a hugely important argument, absolutely
But
central
that's valid. That's valid.
to your view of what Zionism and what the state of
Can I-
Israel is. Not to enter into that argument to me from
It's
somebody
just
where I
not
sit.
criticism of
Does it
Israel.
make any?
Can I-
All right. Well,
It's,
we'll-
that's not what
Okay.
criticism of Israel
All right.
is.
Mark, can I make a suggestion? So, from my perspective, Israel is a society with contradictions and problems. But to me, it's a miracle. It's a miracle that we've been able to return and reestablish Israel, Jerusalem as its capital. There's the ingathering of Jews from all over the world. It's really incredible.
turned us to history.
To be an indigenous culture in our land is really, it's unprecedented and could serve as an example for other struggling peoples, but that's a whole other issue. So I think, and in terms of its democratic nature, I would argue that Israel is perhaps the most democratic country in the world, in that it's in this space where it's struggling for survival and yet maintains a rule of law. It's vibrant universities, vibrant civic society, media, it's innovation, it's technology, it's economy. It's really, to me, it's astounding. And if you look at other societies that are in Europe or even in the Americas that are floundering and playing politics within other, like the Brotherhood or Iran or other dictatorships, it's interesting. But my suggestion is, and I think for the new year, 2019, I think it's time that intellectuals in this country, Jewish intellectuals in this country, maybe start a new phase. Why don't we spend a year or two critiquing and debating and trying to understand what's happening to the American Jewish community? When I grew up in Canada, the American Jewish community was the quintessential, most powerful, organized, Zionist, dedicated, practicing community in the world. And what has become of it? What's happening in terms of assimilation? What's happening in terms of our principles as a Jewish community and supporting Israel, not with criticism? Sometimes criticism is the best way to support our friends, constructive criticism. But what's happening here? How can our leaders say the things that they say and stand for the things that they say? How can we allow such high levels of intermarriage, such high levels of assimilation, and not just assimilation, ethnic or racial or peoplehood assimilation, just the assimilation of ideas, the lack of knowledge. So why don't we, Israel's doing pretty well, thank God. What's happening here? Maybe our leaders should take that energy and look at our congregations and look at our schools and say what is happening here, and how can the criticisms of Israel be so, I don't know, unprecedented?
Two points to be made. You're absolutely right about everything that you just said.
Well, we'll stop there.
Secondly, what happens in Israel is part of that equation.
Sure.
Israel came about to offer refuge to the Jewish people and physical security and return us to history, and also to create a moral and spiritual renaissance in the Jewish world. And Israel needs to be our partner as we deal with the issues of Judaism and Torah and of mitzvot. And Jewish ritual is essential, the most essential element of Jewish survival and Jewish continuity.
Very interesting.
So, I mean, we talk here about the great issues of the world, exceedingly important
Right.
and part of who we are and what we do. But ultimately, absent some strong degree of commitment to Jewish religious tradition, we're not going to have Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Religious drift, religious uncertainty, religious confusion, religious assimilation. That is, at any time, but particularly now, it seems to me, the central crisis that we face.
Am I not correct that during your tenure as president of the URJ, one of the things you tried to do was move the movement closer towards the core of Jewish tradition?
No, I think that's true. I was very much interested in focusing in particular on Jewish study, Jewish learning. I thought that we had much to do in that regard. There were too many Jews who were simply ignorant Jews. They weren't competent Jews. I also put a great deal of focus on some particular aspects of our ritual tradition.
For example?
I have to revive Jewish worship. Jewish worship is central. Shabbat is central. The worship experience as it had become in Reform synagogues for, periodly, leading up to the 80s and 90s, was simply so boring and deadly that one had to wonder why anybody ever walked through the door of a shul. So there was already happening. I mean, I can't claim full credit here. I mean, we already had lay leaders and rabbis and cantors who had begun to say, this is not what Jewish worship is about, that there's an ecstasy deficit here. And it's not inconsistent with fundamentally the rational approach that has always characterized Reform Judaism. And the idea was, how do we put them together? So on the one hand, during a 20-year period, in a sense, it's one of the great miracles of modern Jewish life from a Reform perspective, in that worship in every corner of the Reform movement throughout North America, and to some extent throughout the world, but certainly throughout North America, changed radically. Radically. Music became far more important, much more emphasis on Hebrew literacy. And so, those kinds of concerns, always important, very important now. We are, despite all that we said before, despite the issues of anti-Semitism that we all see, some emphasizing more than others, the truth is we are welcomed in America, and we are embraced by America, and it's easy to be lost in the culture of America and to lose all ties to our tradition and our heritage, and religion needs to be the central element in reviving our sense of peoplehood.
Okay, I want to push you on one issue here. There are those who stand over against the liberal branches, the liberal movements of Judaism. Reform specifically, to some extent conservative Judaism, to some extent Reconstructionist Judaism, and argue that for all the good intentions, the lack of emphasis on, for lack of a better word, ritual, Jews wouldn't use the word ritual, of mitzvot that have to do with the way a Jew lives inside one's home, kashrut, Shabbat, Brit Milah, certain kind of celebrations of Yom Tov, of Jewish holidays. That one of the problems is that Reform Judaism did not emphasize Jewish behavior enough, and as intellectually as exciting as it may have been, as much as it may have taught the other movements to be sensitive to, for example, women, or gay rights, or social action, which sometime when I wasn't looking morphed into Tikkun Olam, that for all that strength, the weakness of the modern liberal Jewish movements is that it has not created enough, not none, but enough committed Jewish families, and that it is in some way been overrun by assimilation, which therefore is eroding Jewish life, and in some way, Reform Jewish leaders, conservative Jewish leaders, have to take responsibility for that. Speak to that for a moment.
Well, we are the most committed, I would like to suggest, to the broader society. Issues of social justice, tikkun olam, or whatever we may want to call them, are central to what we are, to who we are. We feel that that's a mandate of our tradition, and engaging in works of tikkun olam is absolutely essential from a religious perspective. So it is a commandment every bit as much as other aspects of our rituals are commandments. But has there been an imbalance in that regard? And I think you're asking that question, and the answer is yes. We can't be concerned about the broader problems of society, even if we bring our Jewish values to bear, and we see this as a Jewish obligation, and we act as Jews. That can't be a substitute for Torah study. That can't be a substitute for Shabbat observance. That can't be a substitute for festival observance. What is our religious reality right now in America, in all the movements? And while I would put the ultra-Orthodox in a separate category, my own view is Reform conservative and Orthodox to some extent face the same problems. And we have a committed core. And the committed core is more committed now than we would have imagined possible 30 years ago. We have people who, in our movement, who daven the service in Hebrew and who wear kippot and observe kashrut either from a traditional perspective or from a Reform perspective, which may be adapted. We have people who are immersed in certain rituals that would have been dismissed by classical reformers a century ago. We have a certain creativity and diversity and gusto that's characteristic of our religious life that really is quite extraordinary. And, my children are knowledgeable in a way that I never could have hoped to be, and that's true for the children of many others who aren't rabbis. But having said that, we're talking about a core here, a committed core, while the masses,
yes,
the majority, are in many cases on the fringes.
Yes.
The key dividing line in my experience is those who are in the synagogue and those who are out. Those who are in the synagogue, whatever their level of observance, have a measure of commitment and, generally speaking, an engagement with ritual and tradition that goes considerably beyond what you were likely to find in non-synagogue members. And then, of course, within the synagogue, too, you have the most committed, the most involved, the most competent Jews, and you have the others. So the great challenge that we face is how do we bring this energy and enthusiasm and devotion that we find among the committed nucleus, and how do we extend it to the great masses who some of whom are never going to belong to a synagogue. Those that I worry about 70% of American Jews, numbers are different in Canada, but 70% of American Jews will belong to a synagogue at one point in their life. Roughly 32 to 35% will belong right now at any given moment. The 30% who never belong are those most at risk, those who are most likely to sever their ties with the Jewish people.
Which is what you mean by at risk.
Yes, sever their ties to the Jewish people,
Okay.
and that concerns me a great deal. But even for those within the confines of the synagogue, we have a great deal of work to do. Mm-hmm. Again, I want to suggest it is particularly our issue because of our embrace of the broader society, but it's a problem for conservative and Orthodox Jews as well, and we can't let up for a single second.
I think one of our biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge, is Jewish ignorance or Jewish illiteracy, I would call it, amongst our young people. Many of them, never mind not knowing traditions or customs, they don't know how to read Hebrew, they don't know much about Israel, which is why I think so many of them fall into that the so-called human rights atmosphere on campus that basically becomes a magnet for people who just don't know, and a magnet for people who will automatically pick up on who they think the underdog is in whatever situation. They don't know Jewish history, they don't know Zionist history, they don't know much about many things Jewish, and I think that is really a recipe for self-doubt. It's a recipe for loss of identity. It's a recipe for falling prey to such movements such as BDS, and it is a recipe for just having no confidence in who you are when you're young, and that's just not good for our future. And I think we need to do a lot about that. I'm encouraged to hear Eric talk about insistence on more studies of tradition and Jewish literacy in the Reform movement. It would be great if we had it all across the board, and I'm identified with the Orthodox movement. We're always looking to encourage it and increase it there as well.
Is the problem you describe present in the Orthodox community as well?
Not not to that degree. I mean, we have our losses as well, but for the most part, no, it is not that kind of a problem. But what I think it winds up being our problem in the Orthodox community is that when you have such disparate gaps, when you have these gaps of knowledge, and Jews who understand then so little about each other because what they know is really so different, it contributes to some of the things I think that Thane was discussing, which is about a gap between Jews. You know, it's just another thing that really contributes to the distance between us. We don't know what we're talking about. We don't know what our experiences are about, and that's very painful.
All right, one more follow-up. Why? If this is the problem of 2018 as we enter 2019, where did it come from? How did this happen?
Well, I think it's been festering for a long time, as you have said. I think it has been recognized for so many years. I have been hearing Jewish leadership in the community, in the communal bodies, talking about Jewish education and basically paying lip service to the problem rather than really addressing it in some concrete way. They have, as wonderful as birthright is, and it is really, really wonderful, I don't think that you can still send a child that you have not educated Jewishly to Israel for 10 days or 3 weeks and expect instant Zionist. It doesn't happen. Add water and stir. It doesn't go that way. And it has to, Jewish education is something, raising a Jewish child, raising a knowledgeable Jewish child into a knowledgeable Jewish adolescent and then young adult takes time, takes nurturing, just like any other method of education that you're trying to inculcate into your child, whether it's morality, ethics, democratic values. All of this really should be one part of this package. Jewish identity is part of it. It doesn't come divorced from Torah-based education. It just doesn't come divorced that way. It's very nice. You can have lots of people who are morally upright and upstanding, but you need Jewish young people to understand how it is really part and parcel of their tradition, how our Jewish customs, our mitzvot, are vehicles for all of those values that we hold so dear. And I think if we continue to neglect it in this day and age, why now is it a tougher problem? Because we're faced with one of the problems we've outlined a little before, which is we're all shouting at each other over these chasms. No one's listening. And we're all focusing on me, and how I see things, and not on what our common problems are.
All right, you've heard Eric, Thane, and Betty. What's your answer? What to you is the biggest threat or problem facing Jewry, Jewish life, as we enter 2019?
So I would agree with the other responses in that I think the greatest threat to the American Jewish community is the level of assimilation and drifting away from the body of knowledge and wisdom and tradition of Judaism, and sort of being melted into the great melting pot of the United States of America and disappearing from the community. And I would argue and I think what goes along with that too is kind of, and it's actually a form of idolatry, in that placing material success above anything else. So going to the right schools, going to the right institutions, getting the right jobs. Families, upper middle class, wealthy families in this country place so much emphasis on this pedigree, going to the right elementary school, the right university, getting the right job, getting the right internship. We've neglected Jewish, not only tradition, but Jewish values. And that is giving rise to a generation that I think are very successful materially, but they've disconnected from their roots.
Okay, you all say it so well. I want to give you something to think about, and I want you to respond to me. Very often, the problem is discussed in terms of young people. Teenagers, early college. My experience is that Judaism, Torah, a sense of Jewish values, become much more present in someone's life as they really enter life. I don't think Judaism is for children. I think the Jewish home is for children. But I think Judaism is really an extraordinary embrace of life, a philosophy, a way of living life, which until you're living it, until you are in a relationship, until you're married, until you have children, until you have a mortgage, until you have parents that you need to care for, the power of Judaism is not the same. As you become part of the real world, and a child is still a child. And in our world, children are children for much longer time, and I'm not critical of it, just describing it. That until someone becomes really a young adult, Judaism is peripheral, and it doesn't surprise me. And it's not about educating children. I want to educate the young, newly married couple. And one of the things that I thought you might say, and maybe you would say it anyway, I worry that assimilation is a product, you've touched on a little bit, of what young Jews experience at home. That they're not being brought up in a home that loves Jewish, that talks about Israel, that ever wants to visit Israel. They don't see it. If they don't have Shabbat in their home, telling them what Shabbat is like telling somebody who's never had a child what it is to be a parent. And you don't know what marriage is till you've been married. You don't know what being a parent is till you have one child. And there are some who say you don't know what being a parent is until you have two children. And I think there's truth to that. So what concerns me is the Jewish community has often talked about and thought about how do we get the young kid, the pre-bar mitzvah, pre-bat mitzvah, and then the kid before he goes to college. A Jew isn't ready for the ideas of Judaism until they get to college. And what the Reform movement has done magnificently is it has found emotional ways to involve young people. The Nifty program, which came, it was modeled after Ramah and Sedgwick and all kinds of Jewish youth groups, which were more interested in experience, even though there was an educational component, it was really experiential. And that what you wanted to do is we wanted to get kids involved emotionally through the home and through their relationship with the kids, so that at one point, as they become young adults, they would be interested. What frightens me is that I don't see among Jewish parents today, Jewish households today, terribly much commitment to Jewish, and they've never given their children who grow up in their homes a context, a feel for it. And
that's the mistake. That's what's missing.
Isn't
because we have a mezuzah on every doorpost in our home. What's in the mezuzah? V'shinantam levanecha. That's what's in the mezuzah.
To teach
all
it
the
to
time.
your children.
You have to teach it to your children.
Repeatedly.
Repeatedly,
Yes.
all day, all night.
Yes.
It says again, v'higadatala v'ncha bayom ha'hu, and you have to tell your child that on that day, what is the Seder all about? Why? And the kid who can't ask the questions, you have to explain it to him, and you have to make him ask the question. And it's v'haya ki yish'alcha bincha lemor. And when your child asks you, you have to always. The Torah never just says something many times unless it's very serious about something. And I think you are absolutely right. As adults, we've neglected Jewish education, and you cannot expect children who grow up into young adults to really try to really follow the path you want them to if they don't have the background. I think young children do have a capacity to really love and be excited about Judaism, and certainly little kids are like sponges when it comes to learning another language, so you can teach Hebrew at a young age so that when they're older they will be able to participate in the synagogue and participate at a Seder and participate at the Purim Megillah reading. There is a wealth that we can do with our kids that we, instead of neglecting it, which I think you're 1,000% correct, we've neglected, we can change it instead of wring our hands and worry.
You talked about idolatry, by the way. The other thing that I find to be true of Jewish life, the anti-Semite had it all wrong. You want to get rid of us? Be nice to us. Open society. The minute the Jew has the opportunity to walk out their door and into society as a whole, there is a stampede. And I don't want anti-Semitism to be the reason any Jew is ever Jewish. Never do I want that. And I don't want any Jew to suffer. But the history of the Jewish people have been that very often, when things really go well, assimilation is high in every culture we've lived in, not simply America. And that what's happened is the door got slammed in our face. And the marvelous thing about the Jew is, if you come after us, we get together, we stop arguing. Oh, we always argue to some extent. Jews do rally, and we survive. And here we live in America, where the last discussion aside, we are basically living in, to call the golden age of Spain golden, if that was golden, whatever is, divine, that's where we are now. And the problem is, it allows Jews to act less Jewish, to be involved less Jewishly, and we have to find a way to get people excited.
We just finished celebrating Hanukkah, and I don't follow Chabad. I have a lot of respect for the work they do all over the world, but it's interesting that Rabbi Schneerson said that the most important Jewish holiday for American Jewry was not Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur or Pesach or the high holidays. It was Hanukkah. Hanukkah, according to Rabbi Schneerson, was the most important holiday for American Jewry because this is our challenge. The Greeks said to the Jews, you can stay, you can be citizens, everything is open, but just forget your God. And in a sense, this is what's happening to this community. And there's a tremendous drift. I think the Orthodox community is actually growing and becoming more vibrant and diverse. They're going to be around. The question is, if I can just finish my thought, they're going to be around for the foreseeable future, thank God. But what's going to happen to those who embrace Tikkun Olam? What's happening to their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren? So I think traditional Judaism, the New York Judaism of the 50s and 60s of Woody Allen and that sort of thing, that Judaism has gone into the history books. And now we have a new reality. And I think the only thing that sustains us is real, as Betty was saying, is learning the tradition, studying the Torah, studying the wisdom, and that we should do it as a community. We have these different streams. There's different forms of Orthodox Judaism, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist. There's all types. And I don't think that any of us now should really have the sort of the assumptions that one is superior, one is more connected to notions of human rights and justice and the rights of women. You can take an Orthodox perspective and go very, very deep into thousands of years of wisdom and come up with very, I think, profound understanding of respecting all kinds of people.
I believe liberal Judaism got it from their Jewish roots. I'm only saying, what I was saying was, I've been quoting Yitz Greenberg and Avi Weiss, both of whom have been more open to dealing with and to interacting with and embracing non-Orthodox forms of Judaism. And what they've said to me is, we've learned also certain things from non-Orthodox Judaism. As you hear this discussion, as someone who is not an observant Jew, what's your reaction to it?
So many thoughts. One is I agree with Charles. I'm not sure whether that 1970s style cultural Jew has the same kind of staying power that they had as a source of identity.
It would be sad if you're right, and but you may be right.
Yeah, I don't.
But it would make me sad.
It is very sad, but I mean, think about why that's the case. First of all, nobody eats Jewish deli anymore. There were so many things that were seen as Jewish, right? That people just, right? The bagel has become ubiquitous. It's not our bread anymore. Everyone has bagels. Everyone has danced the hora, right? I mean, the consequences of going mainstream is that we shared a lot of what is 70s cultural Judaism with the world. And now everyone says the word chutzpah. I heard it just the other day, actually. I can't remember where it was. It was from an unlikely source where someone invoked that. So I think that's we've shared that, and now that's not uniquely ours, and it's not the only source of our connection. Our cultural immersion into the mainstream resulted in dilution in many ways, not just in assimilation, but just in identity and connection.
Okay, you're the second generation. You're a child of Holocaust survivors. Your books are often about the Holocaust.
No, they're about the post-Holocaust.
Yes, correct.
They take place today.
Yes.
But they're about this in the background.
Okay. Are you a model that will survive?
I don't know. I don't know, and the reason for that is because of what we were just saying before, right? Holocaust is interesting in a way because there was the Pew poll a few years ago asked a question about to Jews, the Pew poll, the survey of Judaism, and it was remarkable how many people identified their sense of Judaism by either connection to the Holocaust or Jewish humor, right? That was the result of the poll. And people were appalled by that, right? I mean, Jewish professionals were saying, what? The Holocaust or Jewish humor? And I think that was sort of the beginning of something we should have been paying attention to. Not synagogue membership, not ritual, not mitzvot, but about a sense of pride that when I watch Seinfeld, I see something else because I'm Jewish. I'm not sure that's sustaining. And the question really is it possible just to be a cultural Jew in the year 2019 America?
That's what I'm asking.
Right? Is that enough? Is that sustaining? For some people, it's enough if they have another hook. For instance, Israel, right? You cannot go to synagogue, but Israel matters too. Super important, right? Or the Holocaust. Betty and I share this. We're both children of survivors. And my not going to synagogue, it never really did have an effect on my identity. Mm-hmm. And
that's right.
It was because of this connection.
Yes.
And when I became a novelist, although I never thought about, I was a frustrated Wall Street lawyer, I wasn't thinking of becoming a post-Holocaust novelist. When I started writing fiction, I realized what was coming out was this. This was what I knew. This was what was inside me. So I do think needing another hook matters. And without that, I do think that over time, what everyone worried about was the dilution of our people's connection to our peoplehood. This is why Israel continues to remain so important and should never be diminished as a source of connection and identity. And that's the concern that I have on college campuses, because what it is doing, it's a cancerous. It's eating away at something that was very natural, a sense that Jewish kids on campus felt an identity of not just being Jewish Americans, but they felt some kind of spiritual, cultural, ethnic connection to a country in the Middle East.
Any comment?
Look, ethnicity fades with time. That's the American way. We're they're loving us to death. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Worcester, Massachusetts. There are no more Jewish neighborhoods in Worcester, Massachusetts. And with few exceptions, there are some exceptions, but not many, there really aren't any more Jewish neighborhoods in America. The idea of this notion that we go to a city and this is where the Jews are all located, that simply doesn't exist anymore. And so, I mean, I would suggest to you, and obviously I'm speaking as a rabbi, although I don't think that matters very much, but I would suggest to you, as I said before, survival will depend on a variety of things. Most important and most central will be Jewish religious identity and commitment. Absent other things, maybe you get by. Absent that, it's impossible to imagine a Jewish future. I want to suggest. I mean, ethnic Jews, secular Jews, with all due respect, and anyone who takes on any part of Judaism, I'm pleased. I want to see all Jews thrive. But the fact is, to the extent that we have evidence, secular Judaism is not going to survive in the absence of some ties to Jewish religious tradition.
Mm-hmm. So I want to change gears now. I now want to know, as we enter 2019, what excites you about Jewish life? What is it that makes you feel that for all the problems we have, there's a Jewish future that is going to be dynamic and sustaining and one that will energize the Jewish community. I start with you, Betty.
You start with me. It's kind of like the flip side of what I said before.
Yes.
It doesn't involve Israel. And I get very excited when I do see, all these skeptical kids on campus, before they come on Birthright and before they come to Israel, and they think they know everything and they're going to be critical and they're smart alecky as kids are. And you ask them on, you bump into them on a Jerusalem street on their program and you ask, so how is it going? How are you finding it? And they go, awesome! That makes me feel hopeful. That makes me feel like, you know what, we have a good chance here. And if we get enough of them to come, almost 2/3 of American Jewry have not even been to Israel yet one time.
Isn't that unbelievable?
Which is really a bad statistic that has been actually for quite a long time and hasn't been improving. So if we really manage to get a good critical mass of these young people over the top, sometimes I see there are some young people on campus, whether they're on NYU and they're fighting against Realize Israel, they're fighting against the bad atmosphere, and then these other groups that come and purport to try and change their minds, or to, you mentioned Hanukkah. We just finished Hanukkah. The miracle is not only the few against the many, but what did they try to do? Lahashkicham Toratecha. They tried to make you forget who you are. They tried to make you forget all those traditions. They tried to make you forget, or they tried to steal them away from you. We were just talking before in the green room about legislative measures in Europe and against Brit Milah, or legislative measures in European parliaments against kosher slaughter, shchita. And what does that really mean? That really means that when these kinds of things pop up in a parliament, the message is, we don't want you here. We don't want Jewish life here. And so how are you going to do it? You're going to put all of us in prison? You're going to deport all of us to I don't know where? No, we'll try to make you forget who you are. Mm-hmm. And when I see young people really trying to put together the shiurim in the synagogue, or the Hanukkah party in the synagogue, or the Yom HaAtzmaut party, which is what I said before, give the young people some positions on the board in the synagogue. They'll do it. They'll run with it, and you'll have to guide them. You have to teach them, because otherwise, Tisha B'Av becomes about Darfur. When you can have your own special Shabbat about Darfur, a moral issue that stands on its own, but Tisha B'Av is about Jerusalem, and we have to know that Jerusalem is in Jerusalem and not in Chicago. And
Very nice. Okay, what excites you about the Jewish future as we end 2018, begin 2019?
So 2 things. I think out of the horrible tragedy of Pittsburgh, I think the left of the Jewish community, for the first time in a while, I'm generalizing, so forgive me, but I think that they've now started to realize or speak out for the first time about anti-Semitism in a powerful way. And I think the community is beginning to realize that this is a serious issue. It's not just a left-wing issue or a right-wing issue, but there's an issue of anti-Semitism, and people are beginning to speak out. And I think that's a very important shift. And I think if we can have these conversations and even debates around the Shabbat table, it would be very good. And I think that, combined with, in the last 5 to 7 or 8 years, a lot of interesting organizations have popped up on university campuses around the country. There's this sort of Hasbara fellowships and Stand With Us, and there's dozens of really good projects. And now I think with this awakening of the community that there is something going on, this is not a problem for just students or sort of on the fringes of society, but we have to really first understand what's taking place and then grapple with it and find solutions. This gives me hope. And on the other issue, I think Israel, the changing dynamics of the Middle East is very exciting. I think Israel, for the first time, it appears, could be developing important relations with its neighbors and in the region with other various Arab countries. So some old walls seem to be crumbling. If this is going to be able to be sustained short-term or medium-term, only God knows, but there seems to be some shifts that could be potentially really encouraging and for the first time, maybe the beginning of normalization in the region for Israel.
That's beautiful.
So there's hope.
Okay, hope. What gives you hope, or what encourages you most as we begin a new year, 2019?
I think what provides a degree of hope, but also a real surprise, is the difference that the position, Americans' position at the United Nations with respect to Israel. For me, the embassy move, it's great, it's amazing, but it's not the best thing Trump has done at all.
What is?
Honest, serious talk to the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. Are you ready to be statesmen and build a nation, or do you want to be barbarians? Which is it? You have to decide. With Obama, you could just be barbarians. You could be in the business of terrorism without any genuine thought about, well, we really want a country, and let me demonstrate to you why we want a country. The defunding, the withdrawal from the United Human Rights Council, the defunding of UNRWA, the specific words that were said at the United Nations to the Palestinians, say, look, you want to pull away. We're not infantilizing you like we did under the Obama years. We're not placating you. You don't seem like a people that want a country. You seem like a people who don't want Israel to have a country. That's not enough for us to be in your corner. If you want us to be in your corner, demonstrate that you're interested in something other than killing Jews. Mm-hmm. This kind of talk, and this is really essentially what the administration has been saying.
Absolutely.
It's essentially what it is, almost as directly as that, is unimaginable. No administration spoke honestly to the Palestinians. You know, with President Obama, it was all about settlements. You're not even hearing about the word settlements. It's not that I think settlements are great. I just knew, like any intelligent, non-Jew hating person, I knew that settlements wasn't really the problem. It was Palestinian rejectionism, incitement, provocation, calling Jews pigs and monkeys, from the river to the sea. It's that. And if you're going to keep chanting, and look, that's what was so incredible about Mark Lamont Hill. You should have lost your job for that, because you were singing a genocidal song. If you think that singing the lyrics of a genocidal song is something worthy of a person who's an analyst on CNN, we're going to give you another answer. You're not. You're fired. The fact that Temple University doesn't want to fire him for a different reason or suspend, that's a different issue. But the reality is that this is honest talk to the Palestinians. This kind of chanting suggests that nation building is not in your future and it's not in your interest. And I think that this, to me, this sort of, and in a way, all of this has marginalized the Palestinians in a way. Betty made this point earlier, fits into this. 87 countries voted last week to condemn terrorism committed by Hamas. That's unimaginable. That the UN took a position that was opposed to Palestinian sovereignty or nationhood, or criticizing Palestinians. How dare you criticize the Palestinians? That's a majority of the countries in the world actually voted to make this statement. So this is so game-changing in a way, so remarkable. And it has a lot to do with another thing that you said earlier in the show. Let us not forget that every Friday, the Palestinians assemble at the border in Gaza for the March of Return. Not the march to end the boycott, the march to return. What does that mean? It means, why don't you just accept what they're saying? They're calling it the March of Return, meaning Israel is ours. We want Israel, right? So Palestinians are killed every week in this. It just seems, when you think about what happened in the last Gaza war, maybe it's because of everything is all Trump today, so all the news is focused on Trump. But the plight of the Palestinians seems to only exist on college campuses. Even the United Nations has gotten tired with them. Even other Arab countries are tired of them. And maybe this finally will get them to be serious about being statesmen.
You began, however, with Trump. You began with his decision to basically, he pulled out of the UN Human Rights Commission.
And defunded
Palestinian...
Well, UNRWA, the Taylor Force Act,
yes,
defunding a lot of the Palestinian aid that was going
yes,
instead to essentially pay terrorists incentivizing them for killing Jews.
And how did you feel about his withdrawing from the Iran deal? Were you in favor of his
Of
doing
course,
that? Okay.
of course.
And you did favor moving the...
Yes.
Okay. Why is it that there are so many American Jews who cannot give this man credit for anything?
Yeah, I think that's wrong. I mean, I think, as you know, I think Donald Trump is, on fundamental levels, is very dangerous for America. He's a menace to democracy. I'm worried about our country because everything about him reeks nationalistic, anti-democratic, illiberal strongman. And this is scary to me because I've seen throughout the history of Jews never do well in such countries. Never. It's never once. This would be the first time that they would succeed in such a country. But at the same time, you do see that that kind of feeling, antipathy towards him, right, has for many Jews meant it's like a no-go zone. That this is a reason for us to reject. And of course there are people, I think Eric might, I fear, be in there, who say, well look, I also think that it doesn't help Israel to have moved the embassy, that it might have actually weakened its position in ultimately arriving at some negotiation with the Palestinians.
Okay. Be that as it may, the question on the table is, what is it that excites you as we end 2018, begin 2019?
I do have to just refer. I supported the embassy move.
Oh, I couldn't remember because I'm sure we had
I
this talk.
supported the embassy move. I don't generally support many aspects of your analysis of Trump, but I supported the embassy move.
And what about the Iran deal? Pulling out of the Iran deal? Because you were for the Iran deal.
I was for the Iran deal.
Probably reluctantly, you were for it.
I was for it reluctantly.
The lesser of two evils for you.
Right. I'm very unsure. I'm unsure now how it's going to come out. My feeling on Iran is one possibility is, first of all, Trump's right. I'll be the first one to acknowledge it and to congratulate him. They're under a certain amount of pressure. Meanwhile, most of the world still supports the deal. So the question is, what is Iran going to do? So let's say that what Iran decides to do is go back to enriching uranium. My take on this is if that's what happens, Trump will do nothing. Trump will do nothing. Because of the whole thrust of his foreign policy, which is, populist, isolationist, and so on and so forth, that he will do nothing. And what will that mean for Israel? That scares the heck out of me. Now, if the Iranians say, okay, Mr. Trump, we give up, we're going to rewrite the deal, congratulations. If he does nothing, the most that he will do is to say to Israel, well, you bomb them, and you'll have our support. It's very unclear that Israel has the capacity to do what is necessary militarily. So in other words, let's not be celebrating about how wonderful this is until we see how it all comes out.
Fine. Okay.
Let's go back to where we were.
Yeah.
All right. I've been a rabbi for 44 years. Two things strike me now. I look at the differences over the last 44 years. First of all, women have moved to the forefront of Jewish life everywhere in an extraordinary way. And look how we've opened up the Jewish world, to this resource that somehow blindly, foolishly, stupidly we're turning away from in the past. And my own movement, when I was ordained, one rabbi had been ordained who was a woman. Now half of the women at our rabbinical school and professional schools, half of the students are women. It's an extraordinary difference. If you look at synagogue leadership, and if you look at organizational leadership in general, it's true in the conservative movement, and it's true in the Orthodox movement as well. Not the Haredi movement, which is a different reality, but in the Orthodox movement as well, where there are all kinds of experiments with partnership minions and all kinds of different approaches as to what do we do in order to engage women more significantly, even in the modern Orthodox world. My daughters are part of that world, and I follow that very closely, and I'm enormously encouraged by it. So that whole area, which we could talk more about, is one. The other is, in the synagogue, been two major changes. One I won't talk about, which is worship. We already mentioned that. The second is, education in the synagogue, particularly for children. 45 years ago, look, a study was done in Detroit about 35 years ago. What is the worst part? What is your worst Jewish memory? Anybody want to guess what it is?
Hebrew school.
Hebrew school. 95% Hebrew school. Hebrew school was the laughingstock. It was the disaster. It was the vegetables of Jewish life. You know, eat your vegetables. Good for you. I don't care if you like it or not. You know, oh, you hate Hebrew school, so you'll continue to bar mitzvah and then you can quit. You know,
A reward.
that kind of thing. And we figured out a way over the last roughly a quarter of a century. We're very talented educators have sort of taken a look at this. How do we really draw the kids into Jewish life? How do we make them, give them an educational experience that's going to be meaningful? It'll be both experiential and cognitive. And all kinds of experimentation is going on now. The camp movement, of course, is in terms of our movement, the most significant success, where we have 3 times the number of camps we have now, all kinds of specialty camps. We've learned the value of building 24-hour communities, which you can do in a camping setting you can't do in other settings. But throughout the Jewish world, there's this period of experimentation going on to teach kids something about Judaism, and in many more cases, many more cases in the past, it's actually working. And when you ask kids now what is their worst Jewish experience, it's likely to be something else. So this is an indication of the fact that we American Jews are pretty smart. And you know, what we're going to do here, I ultimately believe, is what we've always done, is we're going to find a way to make Judaism meaningful for us and for our families and for our children.
I hope so. Amen v'amen. All right, Charles, if you don't have an answer, it's okay. But is there some person or institution you would designate as person in quotation marks, the person of the year in the Jewish year 2018?
I have 2.
Good.
All right. The first is a woman, so Ruth Ginsburg. And she was, I think, not only instrumental in fighting for the rights of women to be equal under the law, but for all citizens to be equal.
And why this year?
I think she's in frail health. She has a body of knowledge, a body of work that I think people are beginning to appreciate. I think she got what it meant to be somebody promoting the notions of democratic principles and ideals and the notions of all citizens having the right to be equal in front of the law. And that's what we should be fighting for.
All right, number 2.
Number 2, Bob Dylan. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature last year. He was in New York for 7 concerts in a row a couple of weeks ago. I saw him not too long ago. I've seen him many times. 78 years old. He's reworked all of his music, all of his lyrics, and to me, his music is sort of quintessential. He's an encyclopedia of the best of American music, from slave music to the blues and jazz and folk, and he has some powerful Jewish messages consistently in his music. And at 78 years old, he's still performing 150 nights a week, reworking his music. He's a genius. So,
by the way, fascinating and wonderful 2 answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know, by the way, Blowing in the Wind may be the greatest single song in that genre ever done. And
powerful.
If one listens to, it's so simple, but if one really hears the lyrics, it expresses everything we want for this world to be. Okay, who is your person of the year?
We are still teenagers at heart.
Person of the year.
We don't outgrow it. Nikki Haley, for me.
Very good.
And yeah, I think
because
it took a lot of guts and courage to speak up in the den of thieves. And she did. You know, I hope she doesn't have a target on her back. I think she did a great job, and it wasn't easy. It's not easy to be there and to survive all the slings and arrows. And what she did was stand up for the United States and Israel. Don't forget that the discrimination in the UN is not just against Israel. There is a lot of anti-US bias there. And I think she did a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful job.
That's wonderful. She was on my list too, so good. Okay. Person of the year, Eric?
Ron Lauder.
How interesting. Tell us why.
I like people who are prepared to speak out against their own camp, you know, to sort of look within, and if they see issues, if they see problems, even though it's their friends and their allies and so on, they speak the truth as they see it. So Mr. Lauder is a Republican. He's conservative in his political views. He's a supporter of Likud. He's a friend of Bibi Netanyahu.
And Donald Trump.
And he's somebody who's also head of the World Jewish Congress and who knows the Jewish world. And he looked at the Jewish world, and he saw a problem that involved, how Jews throughout the world relate to the state of Israel. And he, in that circumstance, did not say my first responsibility is to those who are close to me and to those that I'm friendly with. My first responsibility is to my broader constituency in the Jewish world, and it's to speak the truth about what these issues are. And he spoke about the settlement issue, settlement outside of the blocks. He spoke about the religious freedom issue. And he said that these are a barrier for building the close embrace of Israel that is so important to me and so important to the organization that I represent. And he took an enormous amount of flack from people close to him.
Absolutely.
As a result of that. Then he did it again. He did it a second time with another message that was basically the same message. So he got a tremendous amount of attention, but I have great admiration for somebody within the Jewish community for such a long period. It would have been so easy for him to just turn away, and he had the guts to speak out at that moment in a very public way and to make a difference, I think.
Okay. Thane Rosenbaum, Person of the Year.
Doesn't have to be Jewish.
That's
Because remember, Nikki Haley is not.
Exactly
Although I
right.
think she's now honorary.
We'll adopt her, won't we?
I have two, neither of whom are Jewish. One might be Jewish, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez.
Is your Person of the Year?
Let me just explain why. She and Alyssa Milano, I don't know who that is. That was the young actress that rejected the Women's March for this year because the leaders of the Women's March would not repudiate their connection to Farrakhan. Another example of someone who has the kind of courage of conviction. I found the Ocasio-Cortez election utterly mystifying in a way, in so many ways. First of all, while she's in New York, I mean, just to show you how much trouble the bipartisan support for Israel is in, and this is why I'm concerned.
Are you saying you're picking her for the fear you have?
Yes, she is a person to me, of enormous significance. Because she represents something that I think is a fundamental change in American political culture within the Democratic Party. This is a woman who, while she was running for Congress, called Israel's response to one of the March of Return events, where, remember, this is Palestinians, many of whom are militants, charging the border wall with the purpose of breaching the fence and killing Jews, and Israelis firing back to stop them because every country would not allow such a thing. She called that a massacre without consequence. Right? She was able to call that in the middle of an election, running from Brooklyn, or she's from Queens. I'm not sure if she's from Queens. Running from Queens, she called that a massacre. And I think that what you're going to see, I'm very afraid of this, is this new progressive strain within the Democratic Party. We're seeing it already. The division really started with the Iran deal, where you started to see a fraying of that bipartisan consensus. And people will remember this historically, that it started with Bibi's speeches to Congress, the tensions between Netanyahu and Obama. But you now have two Palestinian women who are pro-BDS supporters in Congress. And you're going to have what is now called the Progressive Democratic Socialist wing of the Democratic Party, speaking a very different language about Israel. And I think that her election is really symbolic of it. I mentioned before, from a Jewish perspective, Bernie Sanders in many ways started this. During the last election, he presented this progressive alternative to Hillary Clinton. And he was enormously successful, certainly among young people. We're going to see more and more of that. I have no idea where this is going. I know that the polarization of the Trump administration has only animated that wing, has strengthened them, right? so that the Hillary Clinton wing is now considered sort of uncool, and what you want is this more progressive wing, which is why people were running for office with the word socialism in it, right? This is extraordinary, and books will be written about this. So I mean, we're only in the very beginning of this. But I do think there was something about her election, and now, irony of ironies. I don't know if you read this. Last week, on the last night of Hanukkah,
Yes.
she announced
Yes.
she's Jewish,
She has
or
some
she's
Jewish
Sephardic.
blood, right.
Right.
She has Sephardic
From
roots.
Marranos.
She's a
Right,
Marrano,
right.
which only, as I said, maybe partially Jewish. When I said you have to be Jewish,
Right.
this might actually be a Jewish woman who took this incredibly strident position in the Democratic Party in Queens, and it may foreshadow something else in political culture with respect to the bipartisan support of Israel that could be, changing, disastrous.
Do you think that a Chuck Schumer is going to be critical of Cortez?
I don't know. He's trying to play safe in a lot of ways. I
And
don't
you
know.
say?
No.
And you say?
I doubt it.
I think that what I'm trying
It's troubling, isn't it?
for him to survive as a leader
He'll have to
within that party, he's going to have to make some
navigate.
concessions on this. And that's what we're really seeing, that this is becoming what was once unspeakable is suddenly speakable.
It's hard to really predict, though, what Mr. Schumer will do, simply because he did not back the Iranian nuclear deal. So
That's true.
let's
Yes,
see.
but I'm
However,
sorry. He
what
did
the
that
surprise,
at the very end
Yeah.
when he knew it was safe.
but the surprise about Cortez is simply that was the defeat of Joe Crowley, and
Yes.
that I think was very disturbing to me, particularly because that was a person who staunchly pro-Israel, staunchly supported by his base, so we thought. And if I could tell you, about 20 years ago, he was the first congressman to introduce legislation condemning anti-Semitism. So this, for us, is a big loss.
All right, so I'll tell you my person of the year. First of all, Nikki Haley was on my list. Is it possible? If I were not afraid of the kind of repercussions it would have for me to pick Donald Trump from a Jewish perspective,
He deserves it.
for all the things you mentioned. This doesn't mean he's a wonderful person or a wonderful president. And what I find is if you say anything good about Donald Trump, you are treated as if you've said you love the guy and everything he does is right. But I don't have the courage to say Donald Trump. I also, given the way you came up with people, one of the people that's on my list, and 1 year I think he deserves it, is Malcolm Hoenlein. I don't know if everybody knows who Malcolm Hoenlein is, Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. And as you respect Lauder, he also, in his own way, has done marvelous things for the Jewish world. So who am I going to pick? I'm going to pick Alan Dershowitz. And I'm picking Dershowitz in some way, in the same way you picked Ginsburg. There is no one who is more articulate in defending the state of Israel. No one. And he does it fearlessly. He has also taken positions that represent everything I knew we once were as tikkun olam liberal Jews who were committed to certain principles and ideals. And he has faced enormous social repercussions for being honest and being honest everywhere he goes. And he is a prolific writer, and I feel that at the moment he may be the most significant voice on the American Jewish scene, if not the world Jewish scene. So for me, it's Alan Dershowitz. Well, look, how wonderful has this been? How wonderful the four of you are. Our audience should know we've spent a long time here together doing both of these programs, and it's because these four lovely people always say yes to me and make sure they give me the time. Happy, healthy 2019 to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank
Mark.
you very, very, very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
There you have it. Our year-end review of the Jewish year 2018. I hope you enjoyed sharing the thoughts and the insights of Thane Rosenbaum, Eric Yoffie, Betty Ehrenberg, and Charles Small. Of course, as always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas you heard expressed on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. By the way, I said it last time. I will say it again. When you heard all four of these individuals talk about Jewish education and what do we need to protect the Jewish future, it's why we created JBS. We hope that JBS contributes just a little bit to knowledge, information, and inspires a sense of engagement and commitment, not only among the Jewish base, which constantly needs reinforcement, but also to those Jews who are on the periphery, and to all of you who are not Jewish, who love and watch JBS. You should know how much I appreciate your participation in what JBS does, and when you write me, it means the world to me. When all of you write me, it means the world to me. And very often when you're on television and you're speaking to a camera, you have no idea who's on the other side, who's watching. And when you write me, whether it's an email or whether it's a letter, however you communicate to me, for all of us here at JBS, it is extraordinarily affirming and encouraging. I can't thank you enough. And remember to include JBS in your tzedakah giving at the end of this year. If you enjoy JBS, if you appreciate the contribution programs like this one makes to Jewish life today, where else do you hear this kind of discussion but here on JBS? If you think it's important that there be a channel on American television where one can see Friday night and holiday services, if one can get to a synagogue in person, if you believe JBS is an important antidote to Jewish ignorance and apathy, then please be sure to send as generous a tax-deductible donation as you can to help sustain JBS at this end of the year season. In a moment, you'll see how you can make your donation to JBS, and to all of you who either have or will be a part of the JBS family and make this channel possible on American television, my deepest, deepest thanks. For Thane Rosenbaum, for Eric Yoffie, for Betty Ehrenberg, for Charles Small, we all wish you a most healthy and fulfilling 2019. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.